Hello everyone, my name is Rutger Hoekstra. I'm the author of Replacing GDP by 2030, and I'd like to thank the Prime Minister and the organizers for inviting me to this very important conference. Today I'd like to point to you a historic opportunity that we have in the field of Beyond GDP, and I'd also like to tell you a little bit about a project that I'm coordinating, a European project called Wise Horizons. To set the scene, I think one of the core questions of this conference and also of our community is how do we actually get all these metrics and all the ideas that we've had, how do we get that into policy? How do we get that into governance? How do we create governments and policies that actually strive towards a well-being economy? And in a sense, we're asking the same question that GDP practitioners had at the end of the Second World War. And what they created was the GDP multinational. That was a term that I coined in my book. And there's a technical level to that. How do you measure GDP? What does a system of national accounts look like? What kind of macroeconomic models are there? Very technical discussions. But those technical statistics and models made their way into governance. It created statistical offices, governments, ministries, international organizations. It went into education. And so this is one of the core questions. How did that happen? Now the technical and the governance level I think are crucial, but I have also become very interested in a third level, the narrative level. What did that do to our conversations in society? What did it do to our conversations in the media and in politics? And to actually research that, I've been looking at the electronic archives of the New York Times. Now what you see in this graph is just the share of newspaper articles in the New York Times which have a certain word. So we see the words economy, the noun, we see the adjective economic, and we see the term economic growth. And what you see is that, for example, during the Great Depression, which was the biggest financial crisis of the last century, the word economy was actually only used in 2% of articles in the New York Times. And if you fast forward 1 century, 1/6 of articles during the COVID pandemic actually had the word economy in them. And the term economic growth simply did not exist in the New York Times up to the 1950s and 60s. And that is where there's a very direct connection between the technical level and the narrative level, because what happened at that stage was that the world congregated around a common system to measure the economy called the system of national accounts. And without quantification, the term economic growth simply does not mean anything. And so there is a technical level to this debate, there is a governance level, and there's a narrative level. But what we sometimes fail to realize is that we need a coordination mechanism to actually have all these different sectors of society speak to each other. We need a common language. And that, I think, is where the system of national accounts is so crucial. Many people think that this is just a technical handbook, but actually it's providing the language, the words that we actually use in these conversations between these various different levels. And then if you return to our world of Beyond GDP, you immediately see actually also what the problem is. So there have been many alternative suggestions on how we could replace GDP. And this word cloud is just a small set of the many different great ideas that we've had, the very different indexes that have been suggested, the dashboards. But as you see, one thing that is entirely missing is a harmonized terminology. Each of these have very many different words to describe what they are measuring. And so there's a lack of a common language to our community. And this is where I think we have a historic opportunity. The UN Secretary General has just announced this year a global Beyond GDP initiative supported by the UN, entire UN system. And the goal is quite simple, to actually congregate around 10 to 20 indicators. And the timeline is also very ambitious. There was a kickoff, and I was privileged to be invited to the UN General Assembly in April. There was a kickoff for member states, and by September next year at the Summit of the Future, the Secretary General does want to have a first draft of these 10 to 20 indicators. And I think that will be very tough, but it will do a great deal towards the global coordination of the discussion about Beyond GDP. And what I'm also excited about is that this might also help in the narrative level. This is because the conceptual approach which has been adopted is actually very suited to the technical level, the narrative level, and the governance level. There are basically 3 dimensions that they use to define sustainable development. There's the well-being of current generations. There's the distribution of well-being, which could be within countries or also from a global perspective. And there's the idea of future well-being and the well-being of our planet, so sustainability. And this, I think, also provides us with a hint of what the terminology should be that we should congregate around. So there are the nouns well-being, inclusion, and sustainability, the adjectives inclusive and sustainable. And when people ask us, what is Beyond GDP about? We don't just say Beyond GDP, we could actually say this is about creating an inclusive and sustainable well-being. And this framework also works at the technical level. So although we've only been up and running for 5 months, one of my PhD has actually used this framework to start thinking about that word cloud of metrics that you just saw. And what she found was that actually if you use this framework where you have well-being, inclusion and sustainability, you can actually map all of these indexes and dashboards in one of these domains, or sometimes they are measuring 2 or even 3 of these domains. And so it also helps us to try and understand all of the knowledge that we have been amassing over the decades. And second, we'd like to also show you the websites that we'll also be using to actually share this information. There are 2 core data websites that we have. The first is the World Inequality Database website, which you see on the right, which has been developed over a very long period of time by our colleagues in the consortium, Lucas Jansel and Thomas Piketty, and it shows a huge range of inequality metrics. And to the left is a newer website that we are actually developing at Leiden University, where we're trying to collate all the information on indexes and dashboards that have been created by our community so far. And we're also trying to make it easy for researchers, for journalists, for students to actually use this data. So one of the things that we have developed is a very easy visualization where you can actually look at indexes and indicators, you can rank them, you can map them, you can show trends, and you can download PowerPoint so that within minutes you can actually use it in your presentations. And we'd love to hear your feedback on this visualization. And then the third website which we are developing and which has been launched 2 months ago is actually the Wise Horizons website itself. So if you want to keep up to date of our project, please subscribe also to the network that you see on the top right-hand corner. So my talk had 3 main messages. First and foremost, I think we really need to think about congregating around terminology. Second, I think the UN process is a unique historic opportunity to really achieve more consensus and more consolidation of our field. And third, if you're interested in our Wise Horizons project, please join our network and give us any feedback on our data website and our visualizations. Thank you very much.